We had President Nasheed on earlier today, and I asked him, what is it that you can really do as a small island state, or even as an association of small island states, to force the large emitting countries to comply? What can they do?
What did he say?
He said they were going to be pushing, that it was moral authority, that they're leading the way, the small island states are leading the way, and they're doing everything they can. What do you think?
They are doing everything they can and more. They're incredibly brave. So are the African nations that are helping take the lead here. And what we need is as much civil society behind them as it's possible to get. And that's why we build these global movements, and hopefully we'll be able to keep building it bigger and stronger. This question is obviously not going to be settled in Copenhagen. No one expects that. We've got lots of work to do in the months and years ahead. But we got to do it quickly because we don't have years and years to spare. The climate is changing as we speak, and it's moving towards thresholds beyond which there's no repair.
I'll remind everybody that you're watching Bill McKibben live on OneClimate.net. You can post your questions or comments at OneClimate or by using the Twitter hashtag #OneClimate. I want to ask you a little bit about the United States. You talk about this massive movement that's arisen really in the last couple of years, but at the same time, it seems like new polls out recently are showing that Americans are less convinced that climate change is actually man-made and willing to do something about it.
The fossil fuel industry has invested a ton of money into trying to make that case. And the Republican Party has been their willing accomplice in this work. And so you have, authorities like Sarah Palin writing articles saying in the Washington Post over the weekend that there's no problem and climate's not an issue and whatever. There are people who are going to believe that, at least for a while, at least until the evidence becomes so overwhelming in front of their eyes that they have no choice. I don't worry so much about that percentage of people. I worry more about the people who do know that there's real trouble and are yet to become active in doing something about it. We need their political engagement at places like 350.org. People need to realize that it's not a problem that gets solved one light bulb at a time. It's a problem that gets solved one planet at a time, if that. And that's why we need this kind of real political engagement. And that's what we're trying finally to build. We left this subject to the experts for 20 years, and the experts failed. The scientists did their job, the engineers have done much of their job, but the diplomats and the politicians, they've failed. We need a real push.
Adam, what are we hearing?
I've got a question come in via OneClimate.net. It says, no matter the outcome of COP15, what's the strategy of 350.org going forward?
All right, that's a tough question. And the answer in part is we don't know because we need to see what the landscape looks like after this. But clearly, our strength has been doing global organizing and figuring out how to build that global network. And that we will keep doing one way or another. And exactly what day we're going to deploy it all next to do what, we don't know. But it'll depend in certain ways on what the opportunities coming out of Copenhagen are.
Something that struck me in the shower the other day, just thinking about all this, is, imagine just for a minute a scenario where, Friday comes this week, no real deal gets done. We move on to early spring. The U.S. Congress is, everyone says we're waiting for the U.S. Congress to act. Imagine the U.S. Congress doesn't act, no real strong bill comes through. Do you think at that moment that 350, with its partners in Tick, Tick, Tick and all the other climate activist organizations have really sort of come into their own in the past couple of months, is it possible that they could transition all that energy into the November elections and really target senators who are sort of the ones holding up this legislation? Sort of in the way that MoveOn.org was originally crafted around, one thing, but then became a bigger issue or organization after that.
It's very hard to do. I suppose people definitely will try to do some of it. Our work has been focused globally, so we're more, our strengths are both in the U.S. and outside. But clearly we're going to have to engage the U.S. as a big part of this. And there are places where elections, I'm sure, will be some of it. It has to happen. And these guys have to feel, it's very clear that politicians aren't going to save the planet because it's the right thing to do. Maybe if we can convince them that it's the better thing for their career, we'll have some better luck.
I want to ask just a little bit about you personally. How did you get into all this? You know, what sparked all this sort of activism within you?
Well, I mean, I've been working on this issue for a very long time. As I say, I wrote the first book about it. So I've been immersed in climate for 20 years. And it began to dawn on me that we weren't getting anywhere. And that one of the reasons was we didn't have a movement to cause us to get anywhere. And so someone should build it, and no one was. And so with a small handful of incredibly talented young people, we've built first the big Step It Up movement in the United States, and then around the world, this 350.org. It's extremely interesting and heartening work to see, among other things, that people are completely willing and able to come together around the science. They don't need rock stars or movie stars or anything else. We had 5,200 demonstrations all based around an obscure scientific data point, you know. That's what people were rallying about. Last weekend we had 3,000 vigils around the world with people spelling out that number in candlelight and torchlight and things. You know, people get it.
Bill, we've been discussing the activism around the conference, which has certainly been impressive. Huge protests outside. Within the conference, how do you feel about do you feel optimistic about how it's progressing? Are we heading in the right direction? What are the prospects?
I'm very optimistic about the showing of the poor, small, and vulnerable countries. They've done a remarkable and brave job. I'm not that optimistic about, my guess is that it'll now be more or less quashed by the big powers in the next few days, who are using every kind of intimidation and coercion to make sure that, I've talked with countries who are, worried about losing their IMF loans or, so on and so forth. They have many tools at their disposal to ensure the cooperation of smaller, less powerful places. On the other hand, it's still possible that some of them will push to the very end, and it's quite at least plausible that we might emerge with no agreement at all from this week, which would not be necessarily the worst thing in the world. A really bad agreement that locks us into really stupid things isn't a great outcome, even if everybody gets to jump up and down and say, we have a piece of paper that we've all signed. Nifty speech from Obama and a piece of paper that everybody signed means just about nothing to the planet. The last set of numbers from the people at Climate Interactive last night showed that if you add up all the proposals currently on the table, the Earth's atmosphere in 2100 is 770 parts per million CO2. That's not a deal worth doing.
Adam?
I've got a question in here from Twitter. It says, how will the increasing need to mobilise political force to call leaders to account change the nature of the movement? Is this kind of becoming a more political movement, less about kind of a clear message and more about mobilising leaders around certain policies?
That's a very good question, and I don't really know the answer. And I think really that it's going to differ much from place to place. Every place has its own zeitgeist and its own political culture and things. That's why it's important to organize differently, but also to keep one unified message. And 350 is that message. The physics of this is not going to change, okay? Everything else, other stuff's difficult to change. Political reality is hard to shift, but it's a hell of a lot easier than trying to change the laws of nature, The best politician in the world, Barack Obama, probably unsuccessful in making the laws of chemistry and physics bend, okay? Easier to get 60 votes in the Senate, even though that's not easy.
I find it interesting that the UK activists are now talking about pegging direct actions directly to the science. So in other words, looking at exactly how many coal-fired power plants need to be shut down in the UK to get the UK emissions targets to where they need to be, and then going out and trying to actually shut those down. Do you see that as apparently you do see that as an effective strategy, but what do you think about this sort of shift towards more real direct action, more sit-ins and shutdowns and things like that?
I think that it may well be the place where we need to go, that we may need to keep escalating in certain parts of the world anyway. And I imagine we'll see more of that in the U.S. If leaders refuse to lead, then we're going to have to do it by ourselves.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being with us today, Bill. We really appreciate it.
And thank you guys for your presence here and for getting the word out.
Happy to do it. I'll remind everybody this is OneClimate.net you're watching.